Imagine being trapped inside a massive wooden box floating on endless waters, not for days, not for weeks, but for more than 10 months. No doors to escape, no fresh air to breathe. Only a narrow opening of 18 inches piercing the darkness. And as if that were not enough, sharing every second of this confinement with thousands of creatures of every shape and size, from deafening roars to unsettling silences. How could anyone keep their sanity in a place like this? How not to give in to chaos, to quarrels, to despair? What Noah and his family endured goes far beyond survival. It is a story of discipline, mystery, and resilience that defies logic, and may forever change the way you see this ancient account. And behold, the divine plan for the salvation of life on earth was revealed to Noah. The Lord spoke, and his word was clear: build an ark. Not an ordinary vessel, but a colossal refuge, a wooden sanctuary upon the waters, measured with heavenly precision. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. So it is written in the book of Origins, Genesis chapter 6. And if anyone doubts the immensity of this command, let them convert cubits into the measures of men, 450 feet long as a line of chariots stretching out of sight. 75 feet wide, a span as broad as a field ready for harvest. 45 feet high, rising like the walls of fortified cities. A construction that challenged the eyes of men and the limits of human understanding. Yet what at first seemed vast and spacious soon revealed itself as cramped when the ark's mission was understood. For it was not a palace for Noah's comfort, but a shelter for all creation. The vessel was not flat like the ships of men. It was divided into 3 decks, as commanded by the Most High. A first level for those that crawl upon the ground, a second for those that walk on legs, and a third reaching toward the heavens, perhaps reserved for the birds and for the rest of the chosen servants. Each deck, about 13 feet high, sustained life in the midst of judgment. Now imagine 3 decks, each with the width and length of a small battlefield, filled not with soldiers, but with creatures of every kind, men and women, surrounded by roars, lowing, cackles and whistles, the clinking of chains, the scraping of claws, the beating of wings, and all of this sustained by only 8 souls: Noah, the righteous man, his faithful wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. But the Lord did not spare any details. He himself commanded that representatives of every living species enter the ark: birds according to their kinds, land animals according to their kinds, and even the reptiles that creep upon the ground, each with its own nature, instinct, and temperament. None were excluded, for the mercy of God extended to all his creation. And in this place, where the roar of the lion mingled with the bleating of the lamb, there was something even more astonishing. The ark had only one single source of light. Genesis chapter 6, verse 16 states, "Make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit from the top." 1 cubit, just 18 inches, of opening, running along the upper part of the vessel. Not windows on every wall, but a single continuous slit, through which the sunlight timidly entered and the air faintly circulated. This was all the ventilation and natural illumination of the ark. An opening of less than 2 feet to light and ventilate a space that spanned 3 decks, packed with life. 3 decks full of animals, breathing heat, exhaling air, and filling the space with smell. And there, inside that floating wooden cocoon, where time seemed frozen, they lived for more than 10 months. Think, O listener, how was it possible to breathe? How could they tend to the animals on the lower decks, where light scarcely touched the ground? How could they feed a multitude of wild, domesticated, and unknown creatures without exhaustion consuming them? How could they keep any semblance of privacy within a family surrounded by eyes, paws, and fangs? But perhaps the deepest and most moving mystery lies in a single phrase, hidden like a rare jewel in Genesis chapter 7, verse 16. "And the Lord shut him in." It was not Noah's hands that closed the ark. It was God himself who sealed the refuge. That wooden door, once open to allow life in, was now shut by the one who governs time and waters. This meant that Noah and his household were locked inside, unable to leave, unable to open the door, relying solely on the divine decision for the moment of deliverance, imprisoned not as punishment, but as protection, confined not by choice, but by faith, dependent not on their own strength, but on the care of the Most High. And here arises the question that still echoes in curious souls to this day. How did only 8 people sustain the lives of thousands of creatures for almost an entire year? How did they organize the food, keeping it from rotting? How did they impose order among predators and prey? How did they prevent the chaos of the wilderness from turning into tragedy inside that wooden sanctuary? Thus unfolded the challenge before Noah, a righteous man among his generation, chosen to preserve life in the midst of divine judgment. For it was not enough to build the ark according to the Lord's measures. He also had to feed everything that breathed within it. And not for a day, nor for a week, but for a complete time, stretching beyond 12 moons, more than 370 days sealed between the waters and the sky. Now imagine the weight of such responsibility. Preparing meals not just for a single family, but for a true floating menagerie, with thousands of creatures, each with its peculiar diet, specific demands, and feeding rhythm. Lions and lambs, bears and deer, silent serpents and birds that chirped without ceasing, great and small, tame and wild, of every color and form shaped by the hand of the Almighty. Some craved fresh meat, others tender leaves carefully gathered. There were those nourished by dry seeds, others who preferred ripe fruit, still others who chewed on roots, and even some content with branches and bark. How to harmonize so many different needs? How to keep this multitude of hungry mouths alive without a single creature starving or falling ill from malnutrition? But the Lord never gives a mission without also providing instruction. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 21, the command is clear and direct. And take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. It was Noah, not God himself, who had to gather each grain, each fruit, each portion of sustenance that would be used inside the ark. And here lies a powerful secret, for the miracle was not a heavenly multiplication of food within the vessel, but the enabling of Noah for massive preparation even before the first drop of rain fell from the heavens. This reveals meticulous planning, detailed organization, and a logistics effort that surpasses the ordinary. Noah had to collect provisions for more than a year, dry grains, resilient roots, fruits that could be preserved in the sun or hung in nets, forage stacked high, seeds carefully stored in baskets. Nothing could be lost, nothing spoiled. The organization had to be such that allowed quick daily access to every type of food without waste. And all this in an age without refrigeration, without sealants, without modern conservation techniques. Only the wisdom given by God and the obedient effort of one man and his household. But the situation grew even more complex when considering what is written in Genesis chapter 7 verse 2. Of every clean animal you shall take 7 pairs, the male and his mate, and of the animals that are not clean too, the male and his mate. In other words, the clean animals, those accepted for worship and sacrifice, entered in greater numbers, 7 pairs, while the unclean, only 1 pair. This meant that while some animals were there solely for the preservation of their species, others had an additional purpose. They would be offered to the Lord once the flood had ended. Noah, upon leaving the ark, did not hesitate. He built an altar and, as recorded in Genesis 8:20, took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Therefore the extra animals were not there by chance. They were part of God's redemptive plan, so that worship and sacrifice would be possible as soon as the land dried. Yet this also meant more mouths to feed, more provisions, more space, more labor, and the complexity increased further. The Hebrew word used for food in Genesis 6:21 is machau, which denotes proper, fitting, appropriate nourishment. It was not any straw or fallen fruit from the ground. It was nourishing food, functional, adapted to the particular needs of each creature. For the ruminants, bundles of dry hay. For the frugivores, baskets of figs and dried dates. For the grain eaters, sacks of barley, wheat and oats. Even the carnivores had to be accounted for, perhaps with dried meat, cured fish, or an alternative diet provided by divine wisdom. All this food had to be carefully stored, distributed among the 3 decks of the ark, without compromising the animal's own space. Pathways had to remain clear for access, storage, safety, and order, all under the responsibility of Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives. No machines, no forklifts, no electricity, only willpower, faith, and the guidance of the Most High. Each day was a Herculean task, distributing feed, removing waste, checking on the animal's well-being. Repeating this for 10, 20, 50, 300 days, without rest, without interruption. And all of it inside a vessel sealed by God, with only a narrow window above, as the sole connection to the outside world. Imagine the heavy air, the muffled sounds, the mixture of smells, the accumulated heat. And yet, life persisted within. Life was sustained, God's purpose advanced. And behold, another mystery unfolds before us. How did 8 souls, limited by flesh and by time, manage to sustain and organize the greatest operation of animal care ever recorded in human history? For if feeding the creatures was an almost impossible task, carrying it out every day for more than 10 months without pause or relief was even greater. Think, O man and woman of faith, thousands of animals, each with its own needs, demanding portions, schedules, attention, and even patience. But who tended to it all? Who coordinated this relentless routine? Only Noah and his family. 8 people dividing among themselves every responsibility for maintaining life inside the ark, feeding, cleaning, distributing, supervising. It was like serving a daily banquet to a wild multitude, where the guests never thanked you, and where the slightest mistake could mean death or chaos. Perhaps you, at some point in your life, have faced a difficulty similar in essence, if not in scale. Perhaps you endured a season when you did not know how you would feed your household, sustain your home, or care for those you loved. And if that is you, write in the comments, God is my provision. For the same God who enabled Noah is the one who still sustains all who trust in him today. But the challenge was not only logistical, it was also human, emotional, relational. Now imagine not only the physical weight of the mission, but the continuous confinement. Think of the family you love most. Picture their smiles, their conversations, their routines. Now imagine living with those same loved ones in a single enclosed space for over 300 days, with no chance to step outside for fresh air, no walk through the square, no visits, no neighbors, no external distractions, not even a place of absolute silence, only the same faces, the same voices, the same topics, and the same environment, day after day, week after week, month after month. Modern studies have already confirmed what human experience knows well. Prolonged confinement can lead to extreme stress, family conflict, and even depression. Yes, even among those who love one another. Now add to that scenario the overpowering smell of animals, the constant heat, the unending noise, and the ceaseless labor. How then did Noah's family remain united? How did they withstand the psychological pressure? How did they avoid fights, division, and emotional outbursts? The answer lies hidden in a family structure, meticulously preserved, and in a singular leadership. The ark housed exactly 8 people. So records Genesis chapter 7, verse 7, "And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark." A complete number, 2 generations. The patriarch and his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. 8 people, bound by blood and covenant. In-laws and siblings, adults already formed with distinct personalities, yet united by a common purpose. Anyone who has organized a family gathering, or even a simple Sunday lunch knows well, the potential for conflict is great. Differences of opinion, small offenses, clashing habits, all can easily ignite in a tight space. Now imagine such tensions within the Ark, where space was limited, challenges constant, and labor unending. They were surrounded by thousands of animals that demanded continual care. There was no pause, no true rest. And as Genesis 7:16 reminds us, the Lord shut him in. They had no control over their exit. They could not decide to leave. They were completely dependent on the divine will, confined under his protective hand, but also subjected to a test of faith, patience, and unity like no other. The harmony preserved during such extreme confinement seems nearly impossible until we remember who Noah was. Genesis 6:9 reveals the secret. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. This was no ordinary leadership. It was not merely the authority of an experienced father. It was direction shaped by intimacy with the Most High. Noah did not merely obey commands, he knew the heart of God, and that transformed the way he led his household. But the question arises, how did Noah know at last that it was time to leave? How could he be certain that the world, still marked by the memories of divine judgment, was ready to welcome them back? Imagine, more than 10 months without feeling the warmth of the sun directly upon his face. More than 10 months seeing, through a narrow opening, nothing but endless waters. More than 10 months without touching solid ground, without feeling grass beneath his feet, without breathing the fresh air of a renewed world. How could he decide the right moment to leave behind the only safe refuge they had? Noah did not act in haste. He knew that a reckless decision could mean the death of his family and the destruction of all the creatures under his care. So, with patience and prudence, he established a method to test whether life had already returned to the land. The account in Genesis 8:6 shows the beginning of this process. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. That was no impulsive act born of anxiety. For 40 whole days, even after seeing the mountain peaks rising in the distance, he waited. Only then did he open the window, not merely to feel the wind or catch a glimpse, but to seek an answer. This reveals his patience, his caution, his faith. He would not risk the future based on empty hope or human guesswork. Noah's first test involved a raven. Genesis 8:7 records that he sent out the bird, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. The raven's behavior was specific. It would leave the ark, wander outside for a time, and return. This cycle revealed more than it seemed. The raven is a scavenger, feeding on carcasses and decaying flesh. The fact that it could remain outside for periods indicated there was already food scattered, remnants left by the flood. Yet its returning showed there was still no safe place to dwell permanently. In other words, there was exposed land, there were traces of survival. But the world was not yet ready to abandon the ark. 7 days later, Noah made another decision. This time, he chose a dove, and this choice was intentional. Unlike the raven, the dove does not survive on decay. It needs signs of renewed life. Fresh plants, dry ground, a place to nest. It was a more precise test, a search for evidence of creation being restored. Noah released the dove, and Genesis 8:9 records. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. She found no rest, no vegetation, no safe environment, and so she returned to Noah's hand. But he did not rush. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove again. And this time, an extraordinary sign appeared. Genesis 8:11 says, "And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf, a green leaf, fresh." The undeniable proof that life had returned to the earth. Branches were sprouting, creation was beginning to blossom again. Still, Noah remained patient. 7 days later, he sent the dove a third time, and Genesis 8:12 completes the account. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. The absence of the dove was the final confirmation. The world was, at last, ready to receive life once again. After more than a year confined within the ark, Noah now had the certainty that the time of waiting was over. God's care had guided him step by step, and now the promise of a new beginning was fulfilled. Click here on the screen to discover which creatures were not permitted to enter the ark. See you soon.